Hi there! Welcome to this video. It's Cressida of Lunar Rose, and it's been a while since I've done a video like this. I used to really enjoy doing these. I still do. It's my favourite way of connecting with you guys and sharing my thoughts. And yet it's been a while, so welcome back. I wanted to talk today about this new moon that we have. I'm just going to do some jazzy hands up here to try and get the lighting right. Nope, no difference. Okie dokie. We have the new moon in Aries, and it's Aries season, meaning that the sun is currently in the sign of Aries. Now, this new moon is really close to Chiron, which is going to be triggering our inner wounds, especially our inner child wounds. So I have been on a little journey with these particular energies, transit, etc. And what came through, a specific thing that came through the other day, is something that I really felt would be valuable to share, because I'm sure somebody else would also find it helpful. Now, this is for anybody, but I am coming from a perspective of somebody who has ADHD and furthermore been diagnosed as an adult, which usually means there may be more damage caused in the childhood and the teenage and young adult years as a consequence of not knowing what the fuck is wrong with you, right? And so there's a lot there that I've been working through for years, but that feels like there needs to be a new level of accountability to it all, and just transmuting all of the sort of stuck energetic and nervous system knots around how I was treated growing up as a consequence of being neurodiverse and basically not being able to jump through the hoops like other people or behave as I ought, and all the rest of it. And given that it presents itself quite differently in females, and it just generally being unexpected, and having this kind of classic stereotype of the young boy who bouncing off all the walls, talking at a million miles an hour, and perhaps behaving as if they downed like 10 pints of fizz or something. And whilst I certainly was energetic and could talk for the world, it didn't present that obviously in me, and it seemed more like just defiance, being naughty, and I was, clever and able to apply myself in the areas that I was interested in. A lot less was known about it. So what's this got to do with this particular time right now? It will be different for everybody, but essentially we're being asked to look at all the ways that we were wounded, usually repeatedly, perhaps even in small ways like a drip of water against a stone path that then ends up creating a huge groove. All the little microaggressions that we might have received multiple times a day for many years that give us feedback about who we supposedly are in the eyes of others, in relationship to the world, feedback about whether we are safe, whether we belong, whether there's a place for us here, whether all of us is welcome, whether we're safe to present who we really are, or whether we have to, start a process of masking, of shape-shifting, of people-pleasing, all in the name of feeling valid and feeling like we too are capable and able to be, worthy members of society that contribute meaningful bloody-dahs and rah-de-dah. Because growing up, especially someone neurodiverse, but I think generally we all do to some respect, we're just on the lookout for things that are indicative of us being in danger, of our authentic self being in danger. And we start to build walls around this authentic self. We start to build many, many coping mechanisms. And the longer an undiagnosed issue of neurodiversity such as ADHD goes, the longer we're going to be receiving repeated same feedback, whether it's from the workplace or university or, other people, authority figures, the police or, the Queen, I'm sure. And that you're going to have a very deeply internalized sense of inadequacy, which is thoroughly detrimental to your ability to show up properly as an adult, to show up properly for yourself, to actually take that inspired action that Aries so likes to stir up in us. And so for me, this is what's showing up, is that it's less about do, it's time to go, fire up. And it's more about what do we need to remove, what debris needs to go, what systems and structures are blocking our ability for this passionate, inspired action to flow freely. Because when we are so tense and the chords of our instruments are so tightly spun, we can't make the music of our souls. We can't release the true messages and melody of our spirit. There's so many things that are constantly coming up to stop us. And that's what I've been dealing with lately. I've found that my symptoms of ADHD have gotten a lot more intense over the last few days, which in and of itself isn't a huge issue. The biggest problem for me is how I react to that and how I hear, and maybe not even in words, but in feelings, I start to feel all the ways that I have always felt about myself growing up, when I couldn't do something simple, when I couldn't complete a task when I was meant to, when I couldn't get started. For love nor money, nothing could make me start the thing I was meant to start until it was like 2 hours to the end time, or writing a dissertation in like 72 hours, no sleep, and going on a fairy hunt halfway through, because that was my fixation, that was my hyperfixation at the time. And just understanding more about the way I needed to study, which was in intense bursts and following my passion, rather than why can't I sit down and finish this page or do it in this structure? Why can't I remember this thing I was supposed to turn up for, put it in right, in my calendar so I actually turn up to the exam? Why can't I make myself go home instead of going to this friend's house every day to go and smoke weed and do whatever else was I fixed in my mind was the thing I shouldn't do? I need to go home and do my homework. And I just had this very... it was like I had these train tracks in my mind, and that once I knew that I really needed to do something that was completely opposite, I needed to engage my willpower, and I was obsessed with self-discipline. This is all I ever heard from people as well, teachers, my parents. You need to learn self-discipline. And the bigger the problem became in my mind, and this is the issue often with neurodiverse people, is that we'll constantly have what we're not doing right blown up huge in our face. And then that's all we can see and think about and feel, and it drowns out our natural ability to just show up and shine and do what we do best. We end up instead just feeling shrouded in shame, feeling like we're taking up space, we're bothersome, we're just, a bad person, basically. So there's so much to undo there. And the thing that I felt really crop up strongly is the fact that we're bombarded from such a young age by this standardization, this arbitrary, or at least, seemingly so, but I think it's very well sort of, I can't remember the word right now, created on purpose, basically, curated or whatever. It's not our image that's reflected back to us, and it feels like the image of who we truly are doesn't matter. There's this big particular smiley face with whatever brain things going on, and you have to show up as that. We have that blasted at us from a young age, and in school, education is standardized. You have to hit this mark and do these things and indulge these things and that lesson and that thing. That's the norm. As soon as you come out, we're thrown into an environment. If you can wrap your mind around it, well done, good for you. But it's really benefiting that person who's neurotypical just because they can do it. Not always. More often than not, they are also trained to become these, cogs in a system, basically, which is a real shame because they also have so much more to offer. And in a different system that honours the neurodiversity that is ever more coming out in society, the more they too would be able to show up for themselves and the world in an authentic way. So the thing that's really come through strongly is about how it's time to dismantle our conditioning, especially that we were exposed to and that formulated our early sense of self and that carried through into our older years. And to realise that because we come from an old and dying system, it is up to us to dismantle and deprogram those systems that can no longer be carried through into the higher frequencies that we are now adjusting to, that are now sort of replacing the old ones that are overpowering, dominating the old frequencies, so that everything starts to come into resonance with it. And the old systems have to be transmuted into these higher frequencies. And the way we do that is to really look and understand that in your bodies you can feel the tension of these templates that don't honour who we really are. The ones that we've had to force ourselves to hold on to in the forefront of our mind so that we could constantly measure ourselves against it and how well we are doing, how much are we passing for relatively normal in this system. And that's not to say that for a minute we do. I can tell you from experience, like, a lot of people will think often that I don't concern myself with coming across as normal or, you know, doing well in the typical sense of the word in school and stuff, because I never did, because I was incapable of it. But I lived a very split life in that way. On the one hand, I was like, I know who I am, I know exactly why I'm here, I know exactly what I'm interested in and what I want to change about the world. I can identify all the flaws in this system. I know what you're thinking, and I know how you're the roof of your mind. I can see those who are more like me, and I was very open, very attuned, and I knew myself deeply, which was a huge, huge asset in growing up in an environment that wanted to chip away at that until I looked like something more palatable and easy to mould and manage and put to work in the world of, you know, whatever, capitalism, patriarchy, etc. But then on the other hand, my deep human need to belong and to be seen as valid and welcome and adequate and capable and worthy of celebration and recognition, or at least worthy of not being admonished, told off, put down, shamed, humiliated, discounted, disregarded, fired, expelled, etc. And that part of me that knew how capable I was and didn't know what my problem was just like, ended up creating a bit of a monster that would, you know, start to really eat at myself, because I had this great blessing as a child, as growing up very, very close to myself and always feeling like it really doesn't matter what happens out in the world, because I've got my own back. Like, there's no reason, why would I ever not have my own back? I'm literally the only thing that I can see out of. Like, why would I create an enemy out of my home? But slowly that starts to happen. When you're constantly confronted with an external enemy, in order to try and appease the enemy, you end up creating an enemy inside so that you can start to preempt the attacks from the outside world, etc. And, you know, you think you might be able to master them. Excuse me. So, those are the days that are gone. We're not doing that anymore. However, we're left with the skeletons and the trauma, and by trauma, this is a very interesting word, but we're using it in terms of a bit like when you have a traumatic injury. It leaves a mark. It leaves a sort of a way that your body has to work around it. A trauma is really like when we're talking about rat labs, constantly giving them little traumas and zapping them when they go for the cheese. They start to never go for the cheese. That's what I'm talking about in terms of trauma. Things that affect the way that we work in the world and the way that we feel what we feel is safe. If we are constantly being our authentic selves and we're getting zapped for it, you're going to start feeling like being your authentic self isn't worth it, because guess what? It hurts constantly. But we are now learning that the zapper is losing power, and that we are the ones who have to overthrow those zapping systems that keep creating these invisible lines of what is and isn't acceptable, who and who we cannot be, what we're allowed and not allowed to think, how we can feel about ourselves, etc. That is falling away, but the marks are still in our bodies, in our energetic systems, imprinted in who we are. And so we have to purge, heal, address, and deeply tend to these parts of us that are still running the show. So one of the things I've been guided to do, which I feel would be really beneficial for everybody to play with, is to look at basically how little time we spend really questioning the model, just the standard model of life that we are living. And that sounds pretty broad, but I'm talking even from just what we accept as a given. Waking up, having breakfast, things that we end up rolling into automatically when life gets fast. As a mother of 3 and a busy sort of family life, a lot of that is just immediately jumping into chaos. Get your clothes on, quick, breakfast, okay, who's washed, who needs their bum wiped, who's got this, oh, PE kit, and I do everything I can to prepare the night before. But still, it's always chaos. And, that's just an example of how something that isn't ideal can become the norm because we don't have time to examine our lives or whatever it is. We're just surviving. And that's the thing, is that we have, what we're doing now, this is exactly what came through, what we are currently doing, most of us, especially those of us who are neurodivergent in some way, we are rattling around with our coping mechanisms. We are so used to living life according to the ways that we have masked, the ways that we have coped, the ways that we avoid our triggers, the ways that we run straight into the same old problem because it was so jammed into us that we were doing this thing wrong that we can barely see that right next to it is a track that would have suited us much better, that takes us to a completely different route round, and we can actually, interact with that necessary thing, such as, I don't know, attending a particular thing every day or doing, making food, whatever it is. Because we're so stressed and our nervous systems are so overstimulated and we're so dysregulated, it's very hard for us to take that moment and breathe and address these things that are actually relatively easy to shift if we can get past the very difficult thing of just running around in circles in a constant repeated cycle of dysregulation. I, as someone with ADHD, find it very hard to, once I'm overstimulated, once I'm overwhelmed, which is 99% of the time, I find it quite hard to go, okay, let me sit down with this thing and really just sit with it until it starts to make more sense. I'm just like, it doesn't make sense, it's stressing me out, so I'm just going to keep going really fast. And that thing, I can look at every now and then, take 5 minutes off. I would have spent 3 hours procrastinating, and I let myself have 5 minutes with it. Doesn't do the trick, funnily enough. And it continues to be an issue that I run away from because it's all in the realm of dysregulation now, and stress and overwhelm. So none of it makes any sense. But if I can calm myself down, something, for example, I've been doing is just spending some time every evening with a candle lit. It just allows my system to recognize itself again. You can't recognize yourself when you're stressed, when you're dysregulated, when you're in survival mode. You're just running from trigger to trigger to trigger, and you end up living a life of complete chaos. Even if that chaos is pretty chaos or tidy chaos. Mine is neither. But if you're one of these people who's managed to create a system that kind of works for them, but it's still just full of coping mechanisms and hiding from yourself and distractions, then you're still not living a life that reflects the truth of who you are. So, the thing that's been really powerful that's been coming through is about recognizing where you are still living in the shadow of a ghost that was kind of imprinted on your mind from when you were little. So, you've never been taught that you are valid, that who you are exactly as you are is great and perfect and more than okay. And not just welcome, you're needed, you're necessary, you're medicine. You've never been taught to say to yourself, okay, so this is how people generally do this. Doesn't work for me. What does work for me? How would I want to start my day? Is it so wrong to luxuriate and maybe have an hour's bath before the day starts? Is it, because this is laziness, this is scandalous, you need to be working and doing 10 press-ups and 10 press-ups, you can see that my standard of gym going. Whatever it is, the internal judgments and standards that we've internalized that have nothing to do with us. But basically, we're being asked to reassess all of our life, the way it really shows up. Not the story of it, but the everyday expression of it. Like, how do we interact with the reality around us? Because we can't actually engage with what's next to us when we're so stressed, because everything becomes a projection, everything becomes a labelled thing. Our minds are too overstimulated and go straight into automation. So we're not really living. Whereas if we take a moment to really curate our life, and this is something I deeply invite those with ADHD to do, is to ask yourself and give yourself the gift of saying, how would I really like to live? I know that for me, one of the biggest things is I feel like I don't have enough time for anything ever. Like, I need a lot of time to do nothing, to think. I'm in a different time realm to everybody else around me. And I need to float. I just have to float. And I've been taught that that need to float is not productive enough, is not welcome in this world, it's not going to get you anywhere. When actually, I'm a writer, I'm a creative, I'm supposed to, I'm a psychic center, I'm a channel. I am meant to float, I am meant to open up, I'm meant to be able to drift. And yes, I love having intense times of focus, but I can't do it if I'm constantly in that mode. None of it becomes effective. So what I really need is time to drift in the morning and creating a life saying, I'm going to get up earlier at this time and come to my studio and I'm going to light a candle and I'm going to, just breathe and feel what it's like to be in my body and rediscover how I feel about the things I'm stressed about when I'm not stressed, because actually then they become fun again and I can decompress them from this kind of sense of I can't get to it, I can't touch it. It's like a repelling kind of energy around the things I want to do. Little things. Is your home as beautiful as you want it to be? Are there tiny things that you can do? The right colours, the right picture? Are you surrounding your environment? Are you fusing it with the music and the smells that you like? Are you cooking the food that you really enjoy eating? Or are you finding ways to allow yourself the gift of those things? Because often we feel like we're taught to just put our needs so far behind on some imaginary backbench that we'll get to, the back burner that we'll get to when we have more time, when magically the system that is proven to work will create the space to be able to breathe and live how we want to. When it's the other way around. So this action and this Aries thing and this go-getter and let's live bold, true, free, authentic is saying right next to Chiron, you've got work to do though to create the space for all that to come through. Because if it's just full of like brittle and like stagnant and chock-a-block with just forests of programming that are completely opposite to who you really are, it's going to be very hard for you to jump on that wagon without completely sabotaging yourself and derailing the whole process and feeling really bad about yourself in the process. So takeaways are regulating your nervous system. That means taking space and time to actually breathe and do nothing, if that's what it does for you. Some people might need exercise or yoga or whatever it is. There's so many ways that we can be good for ourselves. And I also want to invite you to go beyond those things though. There's a lot of things that you might have heard, spun out there. You gotta exercise, drink water, do this, go to, pay a compliment a day. Great, but don't be afraid to go beyond what you've heard and ask yourself, really, what is it that I benefit from? What nourishes my soul? And how do I bring more of it to my home environment, to the space that constantly gives me feedback about who I am? You can imagine it a bit like sunbathing. You're not going to get a tan when you're underneath a cloud. Your cheeks aren't going to go rosy. You're not going to feel that vitamin D glow. You're not going to feel, everybody feels better after being in the sun. But at the moment, we've been given like practically an image of Putin and expected to fucking thrive under it, right? Question the things we've been taught to kind of give meaning to our life, or structure to our life. Question the systems, question even just look at it like, do I agree with breakfast, lunch and dinner? I mean, I don't remember being informed as to whether this was the 3 times thing I wanted to do. Maybe you're a snacker. Maybe you like midnight feasts. Maybe you want a huge breakfast. Oh, what's happening?